just about as many sets of rules for Napoleonics as there are players of Napoleonics, but that heavy saturation doesn't stop the regular thunk of new sets dropping onto the WI review table pretty much every month. Absolute Emperor is just one of those. A new addition to Osprey's Blue Book series, it's an interesting offering from first-time wargame author Boyd Bruce. It's a compact 64 full-colour pages, and the introduction from Boyd sets out his goals. Foremost is the desire to scale down the size of those games, but without scaling down the feel. Where many Napoleonics games are aimed at a battalion or brigade level, Absolute Emperor is playable with a much reduced model count, 50 to 100 figures per army, focusing on divisional command. Despite that scale shift, much of the ranks, flanks, manoeuvre, command and control difficulties you'd expect in bigger games are present here. So let's flip our way through the book and take a closer look. After a good breakdown of how in-game units and scale connect to the history, with a conversion table for everything from 10mm all the way through to 54mm figures, the book gets into how you'll need to rebase your models to play. Or rather that you won't. Frontage is of paramount importance and you can essentially use whatever you already have. Phew. The game itself plays out in a sequence of phases: command, movement, shooting, charges and combat. And a result of actions within these phases are all determined simultaneously, but the lowest overall elan, which is at the core of command and control, which we'll get to shortly, determines who takes the initial initiative and acts first. The game manages to condense much of its dice rolling rules into a 5-line blink and you'll miss it section on activation. A d6 roll determines the success of making things like a contested charge, forming an emergency square, taking a waiver test, or what you do in the shooting or combat phase actions, along with much more. The required roll varies by the type of unit. Conscripts will need a 5+, seasoned will need a 4+, while veterans are successful on a 3+. And this is a really good way to condense many rules that in other games require a huge number of tables, modifiers, and explanation, and it's something we really like. However, that such an important rule is so visually insignificant within the flow of the book is something we're less keen on. We actually skimmed past it on our first read and had to track back to try and work out what was actually needed to be rolled. Highlighting key rules like this, and others that come later in the book, would really help readers to focus on the game's essentials. And honestly, it's an area that we often find could be improved in the Osprey Blue books. It might sound kind of petty to raise it amongst many positives, but where something is a consistently weak area of these publications, we'd love to see more emphasis and visual flair in the future, please, Osprey. But we move on. Several pages of dense text, at least by Absolute Emperor's standards, cover infantry, cavalry and artillery types and formations. Nothing too radical here, before the section on command and control arrives. This is the crux of Absolute Emperor's gameplay, and we're happy to report that it's an enjoyable system. You're represented on the table as the overall commander, and have a 36-inch command range from your model. Your core commanders operate within this range, and they each have an elan value and divisions to control. Their core divisions must stay within 8 inches of the CC to act under orders, and if they don't, they'll have to take compulsory move actions to just get back within the range of the CC. Elan is a number between 1 and 6 per core commander, and it changes as battle progresses. Once per turn, each CC can spend an elan roll to re-roll an activation, recover from a negative status, change orders, or to re-roll an attack. Your core commander picks an order at the beginning of each command phase. This will be attack, defend, hold, or flank march, and it's represented by a face-down token. In order to change those orders and alter a division's activity, you're going to need to use that aforementioned elan. So this is quite a simple system, but it really neatly represents the limits of command on the Napoleonic battlefield, and it does so without the need for any terribly complex systems. Movement, which is phase 2, is so simple and obvious, so we really don't have a whole lot to say about it. Formations determine how far divisions can move, and that distance is impacted by terrain types. Phase 3 is where shooting occurs, and this is where the d6 rolls start to happen. How many d6? Well, that's determined by the formations. 4d6 if you're in line, all the way down to just 1d6 if in march. And then there are modifiers. You'll get an extra d6 if you're shooting at a square, you'll roll 1 less d6 if a target's blocked or if it's uphill, and various other ones. Phases 4 and 5 are kind of connected. There's the charge, and then there's the combat resolutions. And there's much you'd expect here. counter and reaction charges, cavalry follow-ups and so on. Combat resolves in similar ways to shooting, but the modifiers vary, and it's here that infantry squares can make a huge difference in melee effectiveness. The results from rolls in these phases are cumulative over the phase, and a D8, which is placed behind each unit, keeps the running total. It's once the phase ends that the effects of any hits taken are resolved, all at once. After 5 cumulative hits, a unit becomes exhausted, and it drops down to the next type. This means that they'll need to roll 1 higher on each D6 roll in the future to achieve success, and it nicely represents the attrition of prolonged combat. There are extraordinary resolutions too, and these are caused by multiple hits in the space of one phase. And there's different examples. 2 hits will halt a unit in the shooting phase, whereas 3 hits will make a unit recoil and become disordered in the combat phase. If it takes 5+ hits, it'll force a waiver test, and that's either in shooting or in combat. Should any unit accumulate a total of 8 hits, it must make an activation roll. If it's successful on that roll, it retires with its colours intact. If it fails, it leaves with its integrity decimated, and the victorious CC gains an elan at the expense of the losing one. If a CC's elan reaches 0, his units will gradually fall back until they're off the table. And that is Absolute Emperor's rules in a condensed form, and half of the book covered. It's a simple system that has a good feel and allows for quick gameplay. The rest of the book expands things with advanced rules to add more flavour. Detachment and guard units, historical corps commanders with their own varied elan values, horse artillery, lancers, ammunition restrictions and more. These all add extra realism to games, as does the list of modifiers to represent the various nationalities across different years. Pre-1803 France cannot have more than 1 CC above 3 elan. 1805 to 1809 CCs get a boosted 12-inch command range, and 1810 to 1812 units in Spain get downgraded. And this is simple stuff, but those are just a taste, and they're very effective at actually conveying the feel of the army. The book ends with details on army building for tournament play, and some example scenarios. 3 of these are learning scenarios which include a walkthrough, designed to help you better understand the game through playing. And then there are 3 historical scenarios: Eylau, 1807, Wagram, 1809, and Waterloo, 1815. These feature some great maps and special rules that will ensure accurate deployment and intriguing games, and thanks to the tight rule set and reduced scale, even these big battles can be completed in hours rather than days. Time will tell if Boyd's pared-down approach will convert the grognards or bring in new players to the period, but we're certainly keen to get some games in as lockdown restrictions lift in the UK. I think it's time to blow the dust off the ranks and get to the gaming table.
This video has been brought to you by WI Prime, Wargames Illustrated magazine's online members club. View more videos or find out more about WI Prime by following these links.